to this conversation with Jim and Joe Hoft from the Gateway Pundit and attorney David Clemens. I don't want to mess that up. And attorney David Clemens, who has been studying this issue for some time now. We're really here because there's a lot of coverage, in spite of all the coverage, about the 2020 election and the Gateway Pundit and their specific case in Georgia. We don't really get to hear their story. In the media today, one of the things that millions of Americans feel very strongly about is that the media does not represent all of the voices of people across this country.
Half the voices.
When you have an incumbent president whose numbers go up in every demographic, with his base, with minority voters, and so on, who wins, I think it's something like 8 out of the 9 bellwether states and 27 or so of the 32 bellwether counties that have accurately predicted an American president throughout the history of this country. It raises questions how that person doesn't get into office. In fact, I think Donald Trump was the first incumbent since Grover Cleveland in 136 years who managed to win the majority of the bellwether states and counties and not actually win the election. And as we all know, part of the problem here is if you were following Trump in 2020 or following the coverage of his rallies, you could see millions and millions of people coming out to support him. But if you were reading The Guardian or the New York Times, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't have that visual in your head. Because in your world, that was missing. So for all those people who saw and understood that level of support across the board, it was hard. It was hard to believe the result. And so they asked questions. And for asking questions, they have been vilified. And one of the greatest ironies of the 2020 election coverage is January 6th, because the only thing that didn't happen on January 6th was that the people who went there because they wanted disputed results to go back to the electors in those states under the Constitution, they were the only people who didn't get what they wanted on January 6th. The only thing that did not happen on January 6th was the very thing people went to Washington, D.C. to demand. And that is their right under the Constitution. In fact, it was very easy. You only needed 2 people, one person to request and the other one to nominate it. And they had more than enough people on the floor of the House to do that. But of course, once the violence started, all those normal rules were scrapped. And when Congress came back into the chamber after it was evacuated, and they went under emergency rules, what was the only thing that was scrapped? Was the opportunity to examine the results. Not to overturn the election, not to undermine democracy, but to exercise the constitutional right to have those results examined by the electors in those states who were legally and lawfully responsible for certifying those results. That was the only thing that did not occur on January 6th. And for some inexplicable reason, it is beyond the comprehension of 90% of the reporters in this country to actually address that particular issue. So these are some of the things that have led us to this moment where we are today. We are also in a time where the courts are being used to censor and silence and intimidate people, especially in independent media. I am here because as a journalist, I care about the First Amendment and I care about free speech. And I care about injustice. I think most Americans, everywhere I go, want the truth. Mm-hmm. You know, when my doctor told me I had cancer at 41, I didn't want to hear it. But I wanted the opportunity to address it, honestly. You know, I mean, that's just the way it is, whether you like it or you don't like it. The only thing that matters is the truth so that we can really deal with it. And no one's relitigating the 2020 election. Donald Trump is not going to replace the years that, he's not coming back. No one's changing what happened. This is not just about the 2020 election. We are here because we don't know about any election going forward. We just don't, and not just in this country, but all over the world. So I spent 2.5 years investigating election integrity And the machines, and what you start to discover when you peel back the layers is that the software is basically the same worldwide. And it doesn't take a genius to know. The guy that put the Wi-Fi on your house can drive past your house and turn the Wi-Fi off anytime he wants. We don't control technology. We don't control it. There's not an election worker. You work in elections? You speak code? I don't. Is there any journalist who speaks code? Is there any election worker, any election official from any party that speaks code? Do any of them have access to the codes inside the machines, to that language? We have paper ballots in my city, in Fredericksburg, Texas. When I fill out the paper ballot, I hand it over to an election worker, what do? They put it in a machine and spits out what? A QR code. Who reads that code? Not one person in that building, or in that state, or in the country, besides the people who wrote the code, can read it. So you just don't know. And that's the issue that people have with the machines. So what essentially has happened, we have translated our elections into a foreign language, and we've put it beyond the reach of the people who are lawfully tasked with verifying and vetting those results. You can find machines, if you really look, if you do your job, you can find machines all across this country that were outside of their certification by the election standards. You can find them admitting in state after state that machines were connected to the internet. You can find, in fact, if you go back to the documentary that was made about the 2016 election, they tell you this. They go to the HackerCon conference, which is like Comic-Con, but for hackers, computer nerds, and they hack into the machines right there. But it was okay in 2016 to question their election results. It was okay for Maxine Waters to host a committee many years ago with a man called Clint Curtis, a Republican, who was working for a Republican in the state of Florida. And Clint Curtis was asked to write a program that would overturn false election results. Because the guy he was working for said, I think they're gonna cheat and they're gonna try and steal my election. When the election happened, you realize, wait a minute, I've been conned. This guy wanted to cheat. So he quit the Republican Party in disgust, and he went across the aisle. He went and briefed the Democrats on everything. They hosted a meeting. He briefed them on everything that he had done. He had written a program where you could alter the results and you could hide your tracks, and no one could find it. And when he got to the end of the briefing, they said, that's incredible. Can you do that for us? So what he said to me when I reached out to him, that was one of the most cynical, downtrodden people I've ever encountered. He said, I don't know why you're bothering, because in the 20 years since I first exposed this, all they've done every time I exposed it was to legalize what I exposed. All they've done is to make it legal. I have video footage, you can find it on the internet, I believe. You can see where he testified before a committee hosted by Maxine Waters, staffed primarily by Democrats, long before anyone ever had to worry about Donald Trump running for office. Okay, so we get caught up in knots. They tie us up in knots with words like conspiracy theories and, with Trump, those who hate Trump and see it all about Trump and Trump's ego, Trump's a narcissist. This has got nothing to do with Donald Trump. Even if he won the next election and was there for the next 4 years, this problem will outlast him. It's like when the head of Afghan intelligence told me when I said, the U.S. pulls out of this country, what are you going to do? And he said, see those mountains? Look out the window. After you leave, those mountains will still be there. And the rivers will still continue to run. And we will continue to fight. Because this is our war, and these are evil people, and they cannot engender a vision for this world. Well, that's kind of where we are now, right? Elections, we all know the importance of elections. We all know that elections decide everything. And there's a reason that Smartmatic was kicked out of the Philippines. There's a reason the guy running elections for Smartmatic, Haida Garcia, came from the Philippines to the United States. Where did they put him? Tarrant County in Dallas. Oh yeah, a county that was 67 years straight it had been Republican, and one election cycle it went blue under Haida Garcia. So all across this country, even in the great state of Texas where I come from, if you're not paying attention to what's happening on the down ballot and not just at the top, you're not understanding what is happening to us between the non-governmental organizations that are basically taking over on a local level all over the country, and on a national level, our functions of government and our rights are being outsourced. They're being put outside of our control. And so all we really want is the truth. That's what we want to do. There's no like changing what happened now. There's no changing it. Nobody's here because they want to see Trump reinstated or the results overturned. It's got nothing to do with that. And the other thing that's happening across this country, if you don't know the name Project 65, if you're reporting on this and you don't know what Project 65 is, and you don't know what all these organizations are, if you don't know who's funding the lawsuit against Gateway Pundit and others, who's funding these lawsuits? Where does the money come from? If you don't know where the money comes from, and that's not in your report, then you're not really doing your job, are you? You really aren't, because lawsuits cripple people, right? That's what they're designed to do in this case. They're designed to cripple people. And the voice is never heard because most of the media doesn't care what conspiracy theorists, right, in the far right think. This ridiculous term, far right, that is so profoundly dishonest, because it used to be that believing in tolerance and liberty and the Constitution were not considered tools of domestic extremism and the far right. This is a complete and utter lie. It is so profoundly dishonest and untrue, and you will see that. You will see that if you talk to anyone. I had an African American gentleman on my right over here. We were talking. He told me, "Oh yeah, they've been stealing from us for years. The elites in both parties. I don't trust any of them." Everywhere I go, these are the people that I meet of any description, anywhere across America. You can find them if you look. But if all you do is talk to your fellow elites in your newsroom or in your, at your cocktail parties in DC, where I used to live, I've seen it all firsthand. If that's all you're going to do and that's all you're going to speak to, good luck. Good luck. Because you're never going to know and understand the whole truth. And that's why we're here. Okay, I'm talking too much. What I want to do is, I want to be very clear. In this particular case, Georgia is, right, the object of multiple legal actions. In this case with Jim and Joe Hoft and the Gateway Pundit, this is a civil lawsuit, and so they are limited in some of the things that they can say and that they can talk about. This is just their side of the story, because it has not been honestly covered and it is not well understood. They have decided to fight. They, against the odds, by the way. And these are two gentlemen that most of America knows very little about, because part of the control of, and the information warfare and having information dominance means you don't only get to say whatever you like about people, whether it's true or not, but you get to make them invisible. You don't get to hear how Joe and Jim grew up really in hell, and the abuse that they suffered, the two of them, how these brothers fought that together and stood up on their own and built their lives and built their businesses. Joe was a very successful businessman, and whose, by the way, background is in auditing, and how they built a life for themselves. The strength and the courage and the integrity that it's taken to do what they've done, the brotherhood. You don't hear about that. They just get demonized as, labeled as far-right conspiracy theorists, and that should be enough to make them worthless, right? That should be enough to toss them out with the trash. They don't get to think, they don't get to breathe, they don't get to anything. We don't need these kind of people. They should just be pushed aside. They have no rights, according to the narrative of today. Well, that's just not true, and it's not fair, and it's not right. So that's partly why I'm here, because they're not the only ones, right? When I told James O'Keefe's story, people don't know that James grew up with his father and his grandfather doing construction, peeling wallpaper off the walls with his fingers until his hands bled. People don't know any of this stuff. They don't know why anyone does what they do, because they've never taken the time to figure out who people are, because you're not considered worthy. I'm not considered worthy. really hate me because I used to be considered worthy. Now they want to say, oh, she's lost her mind. But actually, I'm exactly the same. In fact, I'm better. I'm better because I learned the hard way. I learned the hard way that we're held to a different standard. And in the course of the last few years, as you've been fighting this lawsuit, you have uncovered more evidence, some interesting things that you want to share today. You are also going to be filing your own lawsuit, which is how you have to fight back these days. And you, David, have been very involved in investigating this issue as well, and you're going to take us through some of the legal aspects of it. So I want to hand this over to Jim to show us, and I want to be very clear. I'm going to interrogate him. He doesn't get a free pass because the standard is the same, no matter who you're talking to, okay? So he's prepared. I mean, he's prepared to be interrogated, but he doesn't know what I'm going to say because I don't write anything down. So nobody can steal it from me. Nobody can say I arranged it ahead of time because I don't even know what I'm going to ask until it happens.